in the Remote Employment Act 2020. To that we shall revert. Honorable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a very brief contribution to this debate. I think that the Honorable Prime Minister who piloted this bill has done so very fulsomely and appropriately. I believe, sir, that the point of departure probably, from my perspective, ought to be that we are faced with some realities with regard to where the tourism sector is in the immediate aftermath. I say aftermath, but we are still obviously confronting the COVID-19 assault on the country. But in the aftermath of the reopening exercise. And it is perhaps useful to remind this House that the financing of not only the Barbados Tourism Marketing Incorporated, but also the philosophical thinking of the government from as far back as June, I believe it was either the 11th or 12th, in a budget that was presented some 3 weeks after we became the government. We indicated that we would shift the funding, not only of the tourism sector, but the raising of revenue off of the backs of an already burdened Barbadian public, and to share substantially that revenue raising process with the visiting community. The Prime Minister in her address would have made the point that in terms of long-stay visitors, we have a substantial plurality of long-stay visitors in excess of 5 times that which we see here as the population of Barbados in any given year. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that the funding of the BTMI and obviously the revenue-raising potential of the government was substantially therefore shifted onto a series of new taxes, the airport departure tax, the hotel room rate levy, the direct tourism services levy. And these mechanisms, sir, were used in order to be able to bring revenue to bear to do a number of fundamental things for the country. Now, obviously, they were premised on people being in the hotel rooms. If you don't have any people in the hotel room, then it is pointless having a hotel room rate levy, because you're not getting the level of occupancy that one would have imagined at the point of the tax being levied. The same principle applies with respect, sir, to the airport departure tax. You do not have the footfall through the airport as a result of the obvious substantial diminution of traffic in the aftermath of cessation of international flights globally, and therefore you're not going to get that revenue-raising opportunity. Same thing with the direct tourism services levy, because most of the attractions against which that levy would have been raised are still either closed or in the early stages of reopening. And therefore, sir, the revenue that it takes to run the country becomes an issue. Now, I think that I want to begin there because it is very important for us to get a few things right, and this is perhaps an excellent opportunity to do that. I have said repeatedly in this House, well, in this Parliament, not in this House because physically we are located elsewhere to where I said it before, but that the issue for us, unfortunately, has become for a long time a repetitive story about numbers. How many arrivals came from which jurisdiction? How many arrivals came from this source market or the next source market? And that really is a mistaken type of approach to the calculation of the advantages and benefits of this critical sector that we call the tourism sector. Because, sir, really it is not necessarily only about numbers arriving, but rather it is about the spend, the dollar spend, that which the country benefits from most is not just people having come here, but rather the amount of activity commercially that they have generated while they are here. I have made the analogy, sir, of the fact that it is possible for a farmer to have a farm full of cows, but yet still not be seeing a lot of milk. And we really ought not to be here just to count cow, but we come here to drink milk. An adage with which a popular refrain with which I am sure your worship is very well acquainted. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is therefore that once we recognize that there's obviously a knock-on effect in terms of the ability of the government to have the necessary revenue, the receipts, to do the business that government must do in order to ensure the comfort and the sustainability of the livelihoods of the people in this country, then, sir, it is important for us to look at what other options exist. Because, unfortunately, up to the time of COVID-19 striking Barbados, we have to face the reality that while there were obviously other sectors, the main one was the tourism sector. The main driver of the economy was the tourism engine. And we're faced with a situation where not only are we concerned about the receipts that we have, but as the Prime Minister says, it is just simply not likely that a return to traffic as we knew it prior to when we closed our borders in the latter part of March of this year, but not closed our borders, when we stopped international commercial travel in the latter part of March this year, it is not likely that we're going to resume that level of business for a while to come. So then, what then do we do? We don't have a raft of other things to fall back on, so we have to think creatively. And in a real sense, Mr. Speaker, sir, this legislative intervention is a response to that consideration that faced the government. What then do we do? How do we build back tourism receipts or tourism-related receipts and tourism-related spend if we do not have the opportunity or ability to rely on tourism in the context and in the same paradigm and understanding that we traditionally have approached it from? Hence, sir, the concept of a longer stay visitor who would be induced to spend 12 months on the island or part thereof, with an option to renew that 12 months so that even though you may have come here for a year, you are able, in fact, to stay on for another year if that is what you so desire, and that certainly is what we would encourage and hope for. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, it gives us a long-stay tourist. Now, sir, why does this become important? Also, it becomes important from the other end of this debate. We have to recognize, sir, that there are a number of people who, during COVID-19, coming from located in what we would call traditionally our major source markets, Canada, the United States, United Kingdom, for example, who had to ride out the COVID experience in their respective places, their domiciles, by continuing to do some form of work, but away from home, but away from the workplace. Many of them would have done it at home. The concept of working at home, therefore, was nothing new to them. What the reality is in the United States, for example, and let me just focus on that one, because it is a major tourism market for us, we still would want to do business with the United States. But the reality is that for us, in the context, if we view it through the lens only of our traditional approach to tourism, there is a grave difficulty that we have and danger that we have to confront. Right now, the United States is defined by everybody as being a higher risk destination. It simply simply means that we have to be mindful of the fact that, let us look at Florida, where we would have had flights coming from both major carriers out of the United States to Barbados. Florida yesterday would have seen 10,000 new cases. There was a time during the course of last week where on 3 occasions they exceeded 13 or 14,000 new cases. At one point, it was 15 or 16,000 new cases a day. This has been a pattern in Florida now for the last few weeks. Obviously, against that backdrop, the idea of just saying we open our doors and welcome visitors who are coming to Barbados from the Florida gateways would be an exercise that was way too risky to be worth its while. Equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's fluidity of movement across continental United States, and the reality for us is that we have to factor into the equation that the numbers of new COVID cases on any given day right now exceeds 60,000 people in the United States coming down with this disease, and it therefore is not an easy thing to simply say, let us adhere or accept the overtures of either of the major carriers who would say to us and who have said, in fact, we want to resume with Barbados as quickly as possible. We are prepared to give you 4 flights weekly or 5 flights weekly. Reality is that once one balances the risk, one realizes that, look, you may be getting a large amount of traffic coming through, but you may also be putting your health capacity, the island's capacity to deal with the level of risk beyond that which we can logically and reasonably bear. And so therefore, sir, we have settled on a 1 flight weekly coming out of New York. It is a number that we believe we can manage in the context of the fluidity of movement of people across continental United States, where people can leave extremely high-risk states, where you're seeing 15 and 16,000 new cases a day, and find your way to JFK and to come here. Having said all of that, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are also mindful of the fact that it is a judgment call for every country. There are those in CARICOM who have opened very quickly while we were being slaves to the science. They were interested primarily in being the first to reopen. And there are many who, having reopened, had then, as recently as a couple of days ago, the Bahamas, had to take a decision to close to the United States as a source market. And so therefore, we have proceeded with caution. But at the same time, we have recognized that it is possible to attract business from that market, which was growing quite considerably. And I want to say this, we have had a long and happy relationship with the United Kingdom, but over the last 2 years in particular, the source market that has grown the fastest has been the United States. And there are a lot of hotels here which have built relationships with the United States of America clientele, and as a source market, obviously, they have been hit hard. How then do we try to reopen to business while bearing in mind the obvious degree of difficulty and, yes, risk, and some would even say danger, while you look at that particular source market? As I say, sir, we have to be slaves to the science. And it would seem entirely logical, therefore, that an approach which says, come to Barbados, enjoy all of the things that we previously marketed Barbados on, all the bases that we've marketed Barbados on, the safety of the country, the friendliness and warmth of the people, the wonderful experiences and attractions that the country has on offer. But above and beyond that, you go a next stage and say, but do so on a long-term basis, where you can continue to work, whether you are at Citibank or Citicorp or whatever institution exists in the United States of America. We say, come here, operate from this remote location, do whatever you have to do, because we have the exceptionally high level of internet connectivity. We have the exceptionally safe society. We have the exceptional infrastructure. All of the things that you take for granted at home in the United States of America, you will pretty much find here in Barbados, except that you have a lower risk of being afflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is being managed, I think, far more scientifically than it is being managed elsewhere. And in that regard, sir, it is a proposition that makes good sense. And therefore, I was not at all surprised when we started to see, a week and a half or so ago, this spontaneous outburst of interest by people not only in continental United States, but around the world, in taking up this offer of a 12-month stamp, welcome stamp, and coming to Barbados. Now, sir, obviously, an expression of interest does not in and of itself automatically translate into a person who is here physically located for 12 months. But you got to begin with the expression of interest, because up until this point, the reason why we are here today is to make it possible for people to actually submit formal applications and for our immigration department to approve applications. So we cannot simply say, oh, we have 5,000 people who are on our doorstep. But we know that there's a substantial expression of interest. I also want to say, sir, that I've had to say to a few people that while I appreciate the outburst of interest from influencers and opinion shapers, the Whoopi Goldbergs of this world, you know, for me, Mr. Speaker, sir, what mattered most? What mattered most was that even as that was happening on daytime television and on MSNBC and CNN and all those other outlets, the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that our technical people in the Ministry of Immigration and in the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport and in the Ministry of Health were redoubling their efforts in order to make sure that all I's were dotted and all T's were crossed, and that this novel exercise, which was unprecedented, was being prepared in such a way that we could present it in the shortest possible time in order to give life and opportunity to this excellent avenue that is now before us, sir. And I want to thank those public servants for making us move from concept to practical lived reality in the space of what is really almost a 14-day period, if so much. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, what is it that we are offering, or what is our target market? We are, Mr. Speaker, looking at a target market that is twofold, really. First of all, we believe that young up-and-coming professionals, whether they be in the media, whether they be in spheres such as